So let's give it one more try. During the talks with the Foreign Minister of India, His Excellency Jaishankar, and during a lengthy reception and conversation with the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, we discussed the key areas of our privileged strategic partnership that were defined during the summits between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, including the latest summit of this kind that took place here in New Delhi last December. And after that top-level meeting in December 2025, a very important strategic development program was signed, the development of strategic cooperation between our countries, which contains all the necessary steps that will be taken to accomplish the goal of $100 billion of the bilateral trade by 2030. We also discussed the ways to improve the mechanisms of cooperation and to strengthen this cooperation further in trade and economy and investment in such a way that we don't depend on the negative, unfriendly pressure from the third countries. We agreed to strengthen transport cooperation and investment cooperation, including the development of the international transport corridor north-south and the Northern Sea Route. And we also discussed the steps that are being taken to improve the system of direct mutual settlements, and we discussed the increased supply of Russian energy and fertilizers, cooperation in the field of peaceful nuclear energy, which is being quite successful at the moment, and also our cooperation in space exploration. As for the nuclear energy, we discussed the possibilities of allocating a new lot for the construction of few more nuclear power plants, which will enhance India's energy security even further. As per tradition, we have good cooperation in the field of military, including the joint production of the state-of-the-art weapons based on the advanced defense technologies, and we also have good plans in the field of space exploration, both the satellite navigation, the manned space travels, and also scientific researches. And we also discussed the international agenda, both during the bilateral talks with our Indian friends and also during the ministerial assembly under the aegis of BRICS, and we focused on the preparation for the 18th BRICS summit that is going to take place here in New Delhi this September. And at the level of ministers, we all shared the view that over the 20 years of its existence, BRICS has accomplished a lot. It has become a multi-dimensional partnership that covers all the areas of interstate, of international cooperation. And this organization is really considered as a leading element in the process of the establishment of the polycentric world order and promotion of the interests of the global majority states. And we have a very reliable, very firm culture of cooperation based on the mutual respect and the sovereign equality of everyone, and it is based on the fair balance of interest, so that all the agreements that we reach could be actually accomplished. It is this approach that helps to ensure the authority of BRICS among the global majority countries, and it continues to be attractive for more and more countries across the world. And we also focused on the crisis across the world, including the Middle East. I mean, first of all, the crisis around the Strait of Hormuz, around Iran, the situation in Lebanon, in the Palestinian territories, where there is elimination of even a hint of the establishment of a Palestinian state. That's what we can see. Libya, Yemen, Syria, all of these has become this yarn ball of contradictions, which is making the situation in the Middle East and in the north of Africa more and more difficult, more and more challenging. And basically every flashpoint that I've mentioned is the result of the flagrant interference of the Western countries in the domestic affairs of a country, including the coup d'etats that we've been observing for the last 15 years, starting with the so-called Arab Spring. We also talked about the practice that is unfortunately continues to be observed with the unilateral restrictive measures when they interfere with the domestic affairs of sovereign states. And in this regard, we have reaffirmed our solidarity with our Cuban friends. As you know, Cuba is one of the partner states of the BRICS organization, and this partner states category was introduced back in 2024 in October during the BRICS summit in Kazan, and now it has just been presented by more than a dozen countries that have acquired this status. We spoke in favor of continuing with the reforms of the global governance systems. Basically, the West that developed the globalization model that was suggested by the U.S. For decades. It has been promoting this globalization model as an optimal model for the global community. It has destroyed basically this model with its sanctions, with its unilateral measures. It has become fragmented, very quick, and now international monetary institutions that were established during the previous model, now it has to be reformed, because this reform must have been done a long time ago, and it must reflect the real weight of the countries in the global economy, in the global finance systems, because currently BRICS and its partner countries represent more than 40% of GDP in the world, whereas the group of seven that still has the reins in these Bretton Woods institutions, it's slightly more than 30% of the gross domestic product globally. So that's why the reform must be carried out, and our Western colleagues are trying to stop it from happening, but this trend cannot be reversed, and the average growth rate of the BRICS countries will be some 3.7 or closer to 4% against the 2.6% of the global growth rate that we can expect in the upcoming period. All these matters, we discussed them at length, and the Indian presidency is going to issue a joint statement during the day, from what we understand. But our main goal, I think we reached this goal. We discussed the key topics that will be on the agenda of the summit, of the BRICS summit, that is going to happen here later this year. And it is going to be one of the key events in the global politics and the economy, I believe. Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov. Over the past 20 years, BRICS has significantly expanded its membership and partner network. It is not the secret that the West exerts considerable pressure in many countries. Has this influenced the admission of new members to the group, and are there currently any applications? Well, some countries show interest, and there is also an understanding that BRICS is a model of the future multipolar world order, and I would like to emphasize this. No one is trying to shut ourselves off from the global minority, from the rest of the world. And the platforms where we can have business-like, fair conversations looking for the balance of interests, where we can discuss the interests of the global majority and global minority. This platform is the G20. where the BRICS countries are represented, BRICS partners are represented, and G7 countries and their allies are also represented, and they're such as Japan and Korea. So everyone is represented equally there, both BRICS countries and their partners and the G7 countries and their allies. So I believe it's a promising platform, of course, unless it will remain a good platform if the Western countries will cease its attempts to Ukrainize this agenda as well, the G20 agenda. I mean, over the last couple of years, under the presidency of South Africa and Brazil, now under the presidency of India, we are trying to make sure that BRICS will stand against any political discussions within the group of 20 that would put into the background any discussions of the global financial system or the global economy. So any attempts to put any scandalous topics on the agenda around the problems that were created by the West because of its aggressive policies, these attempts will not be supported by the BRICS countries. The BRICS countries want to resolve the matters of the global economy, of the global finance, of the global trade. That's why the G20 was established in the first place, and the fair reform of the Bretton Woods institutions and the fair approach towards the global governance system, so that the countries that have the relevant clout in the global finance and the global trade and the global logistics were represented adequately in the Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization and so on. I don't think there is any reduction in the interest toward BRICS, even after the U.S. said that the BRICS was the main enemy of the progress, and under this they mean the lack of acceptance of all the Washington's initiatives. And there is still interest towards our organization. Both there are countries that would like to become its members, and there are countries that would like to become its partners, and there are applications on the reception, on receiving the status of a full-fledged member. I don't think that I need to publicize it, to speak about it publicly. There is a practice in accordance with which the membership in BRICS is considered from those countries that received the partner status, and the second understanding is that at the current stage we will not rush the expansion of BRICS, because a couple of years ago BRICS doubled the number of its members, and now we need to streamline our work within this new format, expanded format. Vedomosti, continuing on the topic of the BRICS expansion, Iran and UAE, the members of BRICS, are now in the state of armed conflict. So do you discuss mechanisms of mediation to reconcile its members? And is it a threat to BRICS unity? Well, there were certain contradictions between these two countries. This is true. And in this regard, we need to understand that such discussions are necessary, both just as well as any other conflicts need to be discussed in regards the main topic. We need to understand the root causes of every conflict, and we understand what is the root cause here: unprovoked aggression by the U.S. and Israel against Iran. And now everyone calling upon Iran and everyone else with this demand to open up the Strait of Hormuz. I would like to remind you that before February 28th, before the start of this aggression, there was no problem, any problem with the Strait of Hormuz. The navigation was ensured, safe navigation was ensured 100%. So when this aggression against Iran was launched, the goal was clear, it was declared, to put an end to the period of history where allegedly Iran instilled fear and terror into its neighboring countries. The same with the kidnapping of President Maduro from Venezuela when he was accused of drug trafficking. And then it turned out that the U.S. was not interested in drug trafficking. They were interested in oil. The same is here. They are interested in oil that is to be shipped via the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran was not the country that blocked the Strait of Hormuz. Iran was not the country that created this problem in relation with other neighboring countries, in relation with the Persian Gulf states. Because, for years we've been promoting the concept of ensuring the security in the Persian Gulf region, and under it, the relations were supposed to be normalized between Iran and Arab monarchies, with the participation of the key neighbors, with the participation of the League of Arab States, with the participation of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the UN, because when the Arab countries and Iran were hostile towards each other, it was not normal. It was only damaging the peoples of their country. So for years we've been holding conferences, and scientists from all these countries attended these conferences. Recently, our Chinese friends also came up with a similar initiative, and Tehran were speaking in favor of these initiatives. And in our contacts with the representatives of the Arab monarchies, and we maintain regular contact with them, I can feel that they also understand the need of this approach, the importance of this approach. Of course, currently the most important thing is to put an end to this war, to ensure that this ceasefire is turned into a final deal on ceasing any hostilities. But if we speak about the long term, we need stabilizing regional organization or a process or structure. And we discussed it yesterday and today during this ministerial assembly. I don't think that BRICS must be the organization to mediate this kind of talks, but individual BRICS members, especially those who are interested in one way or another to ensure that there are no problems with the navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. For example, India, the BRICS president, they are directly interested in receiving oil from this region. Why won't they offer their services, including as a country that is currently presiding over BRICS, so they could invite Iran, United Arab Emirates to start with, to have conversation with each other, to agree on how they can avoid any hostilities between the two countries. And they are trying, other countries are trying to instill this aggression, to instill this hostility in these relations. And I believe that this hostility, this aggression against Iran was motivated, among other things, to antagonize Iran and its Arab neighbors, to instill more hostility in their relations. And we are trying to act with the opposite goal in mind. And you can see that Pakistan is helping establish dialogue between Iran and the United States to resolve the urgent problems, to resolve the existing crisis. And if we speak long-term, mediator between Iran and its Arab friends, well, this role could be played by India, considering its vast diplomatic experience and authority and clout. Channel 1, do the BRICS countries share the view that the Ukrainian crisis is drawing to a close? Can they contribute to this process in any way? Well, I briefed in detail our partners during yesterday's meeting and today's meeting about our estimates of the current state of affairs relating to the crisis in and around Ukraine, including in the context of those matters that are on the agenda of BRICS. I mean the reform of the global governance system. For example, if we speak about the Bretton Woods institutions over the last 3 or 4 years, just look at the data. I don't remember it from the top of my head, so I cannot cite exact figures, but please look at what countries have received loans, and how do they correlate between each other? So, for example, Ukraine, in the last 3 or 4 years, received some 600% of their quota in loans. So, this amount of loans is several times higher than the loans were received by all the African countries over the same period of time. This is a great example of how the Bretton Woods institutions are being administered and whose interests they are promoting, not the interests of the global governance system. As for the Ukrainian crisis, no one among my counterparts spoke about it today or yesterday, but I can say it once again, that we shared our estimates of what's happening, and considering that the agenda of our assembly in New Delhi, among other things, there was reforms at the UN, we urged everyone on following all the UN Charter principles, not selectively, but in its entirety, in interconnectedness, and we focused paid special attention on the part that our Western colleagues do not mention anymore, do not cite anymore. I mean, the very first chapter of the UN Charter, the need to ensure human rights, regardless of the gender, race, language and religion. And we try to draw attention of our colleagues to this chapter because in terms of religion and in terms of language, these rights are being violated by the Nazi regime that was put to power by the Western countries during coup d'etat in 2013. And I mentioned it some time ago, talking to journalists. Ukraine is the only country that banned language in all spheres of life. And this language is an official language of the UN, and the Western and other representatives and officials who deem it possible to talk to the Kiev regime, they do not even mention, from what we hear, from what we know about their conversations, they never mention this need to go back to the need to ensure human rights in terms of religion and language. There is no problem with Hebrew at the Arab states in Israel. There is no problem neither with Arabic nor with Farsi. Nowhere in the world there is such a situation. Civilizations and cultures coexist peacefully, but such a thing is possible in Ukraine. And sometimes when we speak to our Western counterparts and American counterparts, they say, well, when we resolve this issue, we will incorporate this item about going back to ensuring human rights in the field of language and religion. But this cannot be one of the conditions. This should be done, this must be done without any other conditions, because it's a responsibility of Ukraine, not only under the UN Charter, but under their own constitution, that no one put to a hold. And under these constitutions, the rights of any ethnic minorities must be guaranteed by the state. So they adopted a lot of laws that violate the constitution, and they are trying to put all of these laws, all of these decrees into practice in violation of their constitution. And, well, we did not hear any comments on this from my counterparts.
Никаких ограничений ни в одной из упомянутых вами областей не существует для нас. Все будем готовы рассматривать, в чем заинтересованы наши индийские партнеры. И никаких сбоев, никаких отказов до сих пор никогда не существовало, и я не предвижу, что они появятся.
Yes, all of this is being discussed, and our settlements with India were going away from dollar to using national currencies and the currencies of other countries that do not abuse their position in the global financial institutions. There are no restrictions that you've mentioned in any area for us. We are open for everything that our Indian partners are interested in interested in, and we have not dealt with any problems in this regard, and I don't think that we will have any issues in this regard. Minister Lavrov is visiting media center Donald Trump before traveling to China. He was responding to journalist questions, and he said no when asked whether there was an understanding between him and Vladimir Putin regarding Donbass. What does this mean, given that it had previously been claimed that such an understanding exists? We always said that we have a clear understanding after the talks that took place in Anchorage, Alaska, on August 15th of the last year. And I can remind you, and President Putin mentioned this on several occasions, before that summit, Stephen Witkoff traveled to Moscow, special envoy of President Trump's, and he conveyed the American understanding of how a long-term settlement of the conflict in Ukraine can be ensured. And these ideas were based on the understanding, U.S. understanding of the root causes of this crisis, including, as it's been mentioned on a number of occasions by President Trump, Ukraine cannot become a part of NATO, and the realities on the ground must be recognized. The realities on the ground after the referenda that took place in this territory. So based on this understanding, Mr. Witkoff brought their suggestions to Moscow, so we started working on them, and a week later, during the summit in Anchorage, President Putin said that he can support the American initiative, all the offers, all the proposals by the American side. I don't think that I'm revealing a big secret when I'm saying that President Putin listed all the components of the American proposal, one after another, item by item, and after every item that he mentioned, he asked Mr. Witkoff, who was attending this talks, am I saying that right? Am I explaining it right? And Mr. Witkoff said that yes, it was the right understanding of every item. So I don't want to call it a spirit of Anchorage, spirit of Alaska. It's a different thing, because the spirit is always friendly and mutually respectful. That's the spirit between our countries. But in Anchorage, apart from this spirit, there was an understanding of the basic principles of the settlement that were suggested, that were proposed by the United States and were supported by the Russian Federation. And after that, the Europeans and Zelensky, of course, and especially London, all of them are doing everything to stop the United States from adhering to their own initiatives. And I would like to make a following comment. It does not mean that after we publish the Anchorage decisions and everything will be settled. We agreed on the basic principles there. And there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of matters that require a more detailed approach, more detailed consideration. Such a consideration is possible after we have a final agreement on the Alaska Accords. I hope that it will happen, sooner than later. But as President Putin said, under all circumstances, we will ensure that every goal of the special military operation is accomplished, preferably via the diplomatic means. If not, we will continue to accomplish them during the special military operation.
Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov.
I believe it's not a secret data, not a secret statistics. We publish this data both here in the neighboring countries and in the global media. We publish it, and this information shows that oil supplies to India increased, and it does not depend on us. It depends on our Indian counterparts that always received a positive answer towards their requests of supplying more energy, and this is how we continue moving, to continue acting.
Hi, Your Excellency. I'm Siddhant from WION. Sir, how do you see India-Russia relationship in next few months, India is going to host the BRICS summit, and of course, the India-Russia annual summit is also going to take
I've
place.
already said that the statement by the Indian presidency will be released during the day, as we were told by the Foreign Minister of India.
Мы готовимся и к саммиту БРИКС. Премьер-министр Нарендра Моди вчера подтвердил, что в этом году его очередь наносить визит в Российскую Федерацию. Будем готовить и эту встречу в верхах. Отношения наши, если перечислять все сферы, в которых мы сотрудничаем, но это нам не хватит сегодняшнего дня. Я коротко их обозначил в своем вступительном слове. Мы заинтересованы в том, чтобы наше особо привилегированное стратегическое партнерство продолжало развиваться во всех областях на максимально эффективной основе и в ходе переговоров в рамках...
Well, I've described it in detail. I've spoken about this during my introductory remark. We are preparing for the BRICS summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, yesterday, he reaffirmed that this year it's his turn to make a visit to the Russian Federation. We will be preparing for this top-level summit. If we list all the areas where we cooperate, well, it will take all of this day and probably more. Briefly, I mentioned this during my introductory remarks. We are interested in making sure that our privileged strategic partnership continue to develop in all the fields, in all the areas. During the talks, during this visit, we felt that there is the mutual approach from the Indian side as well. Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov. Europeans are now speaking of a growing desire to resume dialogue with Moscow, and they are planning to appoint a representative. How do you assess this stance on the part of Europe? And do you believe that they are truly serious and sincere in their intentions? As for the European sincerity, I would not even cite you the examples that were mentioned by the President of the Russian Federation and in my previous speeches, so examples of hypocrisy, of blatant lies. For example, Merkel and Hollande, they admitted as much in February 2015. They signed the Minsk Accords along with President Putin and then the then leader of Ukraine, Poroshenko. They were agreed, they were endorsed at the UN Security Council, and then a few years later they said we were not going to implement these Minsk Accords. We needed to gain time to pump more weapons into Ukraine. And now they're not even trying to hide behind any masks. Germany is again leading this movement to support Nazism in Europe. And President Zelensky has now been appointed as a new Führer, the new leader of this Nazi movement. And Germany is playing a leading role in this effort. It's a very concerning fact. But we know how it ended from history in the past, and there can be no other conclusion to such a movement. And now we can see that Europeans, all of a sudden, they woke up, and they don't say anymore about dealing a strategic defeat, inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield, and all of a sudden they start saying that, yes, we need to talk to Russia, but at the same time they make a comment, they say, yes, we need to talk to Russia, but we, Europeans, will decide the topics and when and about what we are going to speak. I cannot take this statement seriously. President Putin gave a test to the Europeans to test their political maturity when, on May 9th, answering a question during a press conference, he said that a former Chancellor of Germany, Schröder, could be a representative of Europeans during the talks with Russia. Now, look at what it stirred in Europe. And some are saying that it is unacceptable. Kai Kallas is saying that I should be the one to represent Europe. And some people in Germany, they started thinking about this possibility, so it was an interesting discussion after this statement by our president. Some people even mentioned, well, yes, Schroeder, he is on the side of Moscow, seemingly, but we need someone to look after him, and now they mentioned the former president of Germany, Steinmeier. And as for the trust for the West, I would like to remind you about another event that took place 1 year before the Minsk Accord talks. And in February 2013, President Yanukovych, then President Yanukovych, and the Ukrainian opposition signed a peace agreement to hold elections and to settle all the aspects of the so-called Maidan crisis. And this agreement was guaranteed by France, Poland, and Germany. And it was signed by the very same Frank Steinmeier on behalf of Germany. And the next morning, after Steinmeier signed this agreement, the opposition violated this agreement, and they did not care about Germany or France or Poland and their guarantees. They seized the governmental building, and they started hunting down President Yanukovych to eliminate him, to kill him. And we asked Berlin and Paris and Warsaw and asked them, well, you guaranteed these agreements. Please bring the opposition back to their senses. And they were all saying humbly, well, you know, we don't know if it's a coup d'etat or not coup d'etat. You know, sometimes democracy looks like this. So this is answering the question to the extent we can trust former President Steinmeier. So we are not imposing ourselves on the Europeans, and answer by President Putin must be considered in this regard. We are open for negotiations, but we are not going to run after them, to beg them for these talks, especially since their background is negative, their ability to negotiate, to come to any agreements is negative. They had a chance, both in February 2013, they had a chance to resolve this crisis, and in February 2013 the agreement was violated and a coup d'etat took place, and then in February 2015 the Minsk Accords were signed, and in both cases Europeans were guarantors of these agreements, and they failed as guarantors and as good faith mediators. Yesterday, the White House stated that Chinese President Xi Jinping, during a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, expressed an interest in increasing oil purchases from the U.S. to reduce China's dependence on the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. Do you see this as a risk that it could lead to a reduction in China's purchases of Russian energy resources? And in your view, is the cooperation with China on a wide range of issues announced by the U.S. an attempt to drive a wedge between Moscow and Beijing? And how do you assess the likelihood of success for such actions by Washington? Well, so many thoughts you put into your question. We do not interfere with trade relations between the third countries. We have an agreement, multi-layered agreement between ourselves and the People's Republic of China, and it was endorsed by the government and by the parliament, and in all the areas of interstate relations, including other things. We have cooperation and trade and the economy, and part of this agreement is energy supplies. And based on these agreements, we carry out all our obligations, and China carries out its obligations. And we do not ask the Chinese to discuss their plans of relations with the other countries with us, and China does not approach us with similar requests. If there are any agreements or they will reach agreement, Beijing and Washington, if it's in the interest of our Chinese friends, we will be happy for them. But we will never be a part of any games. I think it was Henry Kissinger who said it first, that relations between Washington and Moscow and Beijing. These relations must be better than relations between Moscow and Beijing. Well, that's the game that Americans and other colonialists have been playing for years, divide and conquer. It is quite popular in the Western politics, but this is not our method. This is not the method that is pursued by the People's Republic of China. We have relations with China, and a number of occasions President Putin and President Xi Jinping said this, and also during their summits they said this. These relations are much deeper, much stronger than traditional military political alliances. These are relations of a new type, and these relations stabilize global politics, global economy, more than anything else, more than any other factor. RBC, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that the U.S. plans to China to exert pressure on Iran with the aim of resolving the conflict, including the issue of unblocking the Strait of Hormuz. How do you view this approach? Have you discussed this with your colleagues within the BRICS framework? Are there any plans to engage with the Chinese side to discuss the outcome of Donald Trump's visit to Beijing and the agreements reached there? We are not aware of any attempts by the United States to get China to do something like that. If we speak about the gist of what you described, to have China help the Americans to deblock the Strait of Hormuz, I would like to say once again, the Strait of Hormuz was not blocked. It was open for safe navigation until February 28th, when for the second time in 6 months, the U.S. and Israel launched aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And what would Americans want from China in this situation? It is difficult for me to understand. So we started something. We are at the dead end now. Now we need to deblock energy supplies, fertilizer supplies, food supplies via the Strait of Hormuz, but we cannot really do that. We cannot really succeed. Iran refuses. Please exert pressure on Iran. Well, it looks quite simplistic. I don't think that this is how international diplomacy should look like. The main thing is to eliminate the root cause. The root cause is clear to everyone. You can read it from the articles or even in the cartoons that the Western newspapers are publishing now. You can learn it from there. Minister Lavrov, how are relations with Armenia being managed at ministerial level today, given the latest events and statements by Nikol Pashinyan? Well, we have existing relations with Armenia, and these relations are close. These are allied relations, but they're also difficult at the same time, considering how the West is trying to pull Armenia, as well as some other CIS members. They are trying to pull it into their sphere of influence to make it break the beneficial trade, investment, and economic ties with their CIS partners or Eurasian Economic Union partners. On April 1st, when President Putin received Prime Minister Pashinyan at the Kremlin, he said it bluntly: we will respect any choice that our Armenian friends would make, but at the same time we need to understand that within the Eurasian Economic Union we cannot continue cooperating if Armenia, as they declare at the top level, if Armenia will be put on the path of joining the European Union, because the trade regimes and many other things, they exclude each other. You cannot be a part of both organizations. And Alexei Yevrochuk, Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, said as much during his statements, and we are saying this openly to our Armenian friends. This is our duty as allies to explain how economic integration processes are working in the modern world, and what's the difference between Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union, and judging by how the negotiations on acceding to the European Union between Brussels and our Serbian friends are unfolding. Currently, one of the conditions that is given to any country that wants to become closer to the European Union or to join the European Union, one of the conditions is to join the foreign policy decisions made by the EU. And at the current stage, the EU's foreign policy is blatant Russophobia. And I believe that our Armenian counterpart also know this, and they will take this into consideration. And I have good personal relations, good contacts with my Armenian counterpart, Minister Mirzoyan. We maintain contact mostly by phone, and we had a CIS ministerial meeting, and Armenia was represented by the deputy minister, but I also know him well, and he was an active part of the discussion to prepare the final documents of that summit. So I think we will have a good chance to discuss the issues we are facing because of the European Union insisting on pulling Armenia into its orbit of influence, and it's happening at the risk of those benefits that Armenia enjoys being part of the Eurasian Economic Union. We will have a chance to discuss all these matters, all these issues later in May, during the last week of May, when the Supreme Eurasian Economic Union Council will hold its summit in Kazakhstan. But from what I heard, Prime Minister Pashinyan mentioned that he's too busy with his election campaign and he will not be able to attend this summit of the Eurasian Economic Union. Well, that would be really sad, because that would be a good opportunity to discuss all the things, all the matters that are being floated currently. Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov, RT France. Recently, Emmanuel Macron has stated that Russia are a true colonizer in Africa. How would you comment on such assessments by the French leadership? Well, the French should know how real colonialism look like and how real colonizers look like. I believe some 5 years ago, when changes took place in the Sahel countries, in Mali in particular, I was at the UN General Assembly, and on the sidelines of UN General Assembly, there are always a lot of bilateral meetings, and I had a meeting with Josep Borrell. At the time, he was what Kai Kallas is now. And during that meeting, Foreign Minister of France was also present, Le Drian, I believe his name is. And since Mali was, well, a hot topic of the international agenda, they started saying, well, how is it possible that you supported this change of government and so on and so forth, and among other arguments, because I was saying, well, okay, the new government approached us with the request to help to ensure with the reforms to strengthen security. We just respond to their request. And during the General Assembly plenary session, I repeated the same thing. And then my counterparts, the Foreign Minister of France and Josep Borrell, they said, well, you know that Sahel and Africa, this is our territory, the European Union's territory. I said, no, I don't know this. I know that you had colonies in there, but then the independence was declared. You ceased the colonization. There is a resolution by the United Nations, and I don't believe that former colonies are yours forever, where other countries have no right to enter, to be there. But that's the philosophy they had. I believe it's in their DNA, in the DNA of our French counterparts, and this is how they measure everyone else. And we have a different system of measurement. Thank you.